You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you for another day. It's Friday. Maybe it's Saturday. Maybe it's Monday. Whenever you're listening to this podcast. Basically, we're less than a week away from game day, which is really all that we care about, right? Everything else is just meaningless. This weekend, some college football will be played. It is week 0 after all, and so there is going to be some fun had that way, and I think that's the really exciting part. But like, it's really just the appetizer, right? It's just the one to wet your palate, to let you be excited for what is to be a great season. We hope, right? And I don't know about you, but I'm excited to see it all unfold and looking forward to getting it done. So transitioning from this, we're going to try to go to twice a week podcasts. Next week may change depending on what happens. We'll do a one in the early part of the week as we preview Idaho. Each week we'll try to preview the teams as well as recapping what's going on, the different news, that kind of stuff. And so we'll get back into regular season mode. Next week will be a little different, probably just because of the Thursday night game. So we'll see what happens that way. But happy to be back with you guys. Happy to be doing this. Love doing these podcasts. I apologize for the last little bit where it has been a little bit more sporadic. My son made the high school golf team, and I've been trying to be a good dad and watch him at these golf tournaments and take care of that. So I don't apologize for that, but I do want to get back and give you guys some information, and I want to be able to do more this season. So looking forward to that, looking forward to getting through this. So today we're going to have a fun episode. We're going to do a bunch of different things. First, we're going to highlight some of the top points from earlier in the week where we had the media availability with the assistant coaches, and we'll see what that means for the season, kind of what they're talking about, kind of what their looks were from fall camp. We can't get into everything, but, kind of get into some of the more high-level stuff and kind of break that down. We'll take a look at some other news related to the University of Utah, kind of some stuff that's going on. And then we're going to close out this episode with a hot take segment. It's just going to be me this year. Last year, I brought on 2 guests to be able to do that. Based on my schedule, I was just not able to bring in any guests this week to be able to do my hot takes episode, but that's going to be okay. We're going to go have fun with this anyway. And all I have to blame is myself now, because now you can just ridicule me and my hot takes for what it is. And we'll see. Some of them may be hot. Some of them I believe in. Some of them I may not believe in as much. We'll see. We'll see. Either way, it gets the jumping point off. So before we jump into this episode, let's talk about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. Utah fans, here's a little piece of local history. Canyon View Credit Union got its start on the University of Utah campus back in 1956. And nearly 70 years later, they're still committed to helping students succeed. That's why Canyon View CU awards $15,000 in scholarships each fall and spring specifically for University of Utah students. Because college isn't just about earning a degree, it's about creating opportunities, chasing goals, and building a future. Supporting students has been part of Canyon View CU's story since day one. Their roots run deep here, and they're proud to continue giving back to the community where it all started. To learn more about Canyon View Credit Union's scholarship opportunities, visit canyonviewcu.com. Canyon View Credit Union, shaping your financial journey. All right, let's jump into this. Let's get into some highlights from Monday's availability portion with the assistant coaches. And if there's one overarching theme, I would say, from maybe Utah football this year, and this hasn't always been this case, but I'll say this year I feel like the overarching theme has been versatility. And that's partially what Morgan Scalley's wanted as a head coach. He wants to be able to have a versatile team where they're not just fixed into one set thing, right? That was part of the recruiting that they did. That was part of the transfer portal recruiting as well, and kind of trying to make sure that there was a lot of different types of players that could be maximized in this offense, maximized in the defense, trying to make this a team that can just kind of be multifaceted in a lot of ways. You get a lot of that anymore with a lot of these dual threat quarterbacks. It's becoming vogue in college football, especially, to have a quarterback that can pass and run, right? Something's going on with my computer. 1 second. Just want to make sure. We're good. Okay, just making sure. It's never fun when you get an alert on your computer that's like, this has changed. So, if this podcast is screwed up, blame my computer. Yeah, it continues to do this. What is going on? That is done. All right. Anyways, we're good. The point that I'm trying to make is there's a lot of versatility. It started with the quarterback, but you're starting to see that more and more in college football with every position, right? A lot of these defensive coordinators, they want to be able to have, they're calling these hybrid guys, right? You have like a linebacker that can mix it up on the line and can drop back into coverage as a defensive tackle or a defensive end. There's a lot of these different versatile players that they want to do. And this is the whole intent of what Morgan Scalley is trying to do this year, is trying to create a more versatile offense and defense. And by and large, I think he's done it, right? We're not going to see the full product until, starting Thursday to see how it's all come together. But the overarching theme to me throughout all these conversations that we've had with coaches and with Morgan Scalley and the players is there's a lot of versatility in what they're able to do. They're not fixated on one thing. For example, and we're going to talk more about this, Utah was always a physical run team, right? That you knew that was going to be Kyle Whittingham's style. His bread and butter, that's what it was going to be. And that's not to say that there's aren't going to be those types of bread and butter type elements to Morgan Scalley, but I think there's a lot more of genuinely building into is what I meant to say, the versatility of your personnel, right? And understanding that there's different things that they can do and you're not a one-trick pony. And I think that's really what Scalley is trying to do. So over everything that was talked about is it's just that versatility at every single position. And we're going to get into some of that here in just a second, because I think it's important to be able to highlight some of those. And first off, we're just going to start off, with the full offensive playmaking style, right? Kevin McGiven comes in here and there was this conversation about how he, is much more into passing the ball around. Morgan Scalley understands the importance of trying to be more explosive there. If you remember some of the stats that I presented last year, and we're going to bring a lot of those stats into this season this year, Utah was not an explosive team last year. They rushed for over 3,000 yards, break a school record. Everything is great. You lean into that offensive line that is just going to dominate. You lean into your run game, which was strong. You didn't have a completely great wide receiver room, and so you didn't lean into that as much. And so you go to your strength, right? So Utah goes in all on that, and they want to bring in an offensive coordinator that can mix it up and not necessarily be so tied down to the play calling that way. Well, Kevin McGiven comes in here. Let's just pop this little guy up here on the board to kind of see who he is. Kevin McGiven. Everybody, a round of applause. No, I'm just kidding. Kevin McGiven is your offensive coordinator, right? And he has had a lot of experience in different types of offenses. Most notably, he was with San Jose State for quite a while before going to Utah State last year for one season and then jumping to Utah. This is a guy that understands the game pretty well. He's been able to maximize a lot of his potential at the lower level of the, Mountain West level. The question is, can he do that at this level? Well, coming into this, like I said, there was this conversation about him just being much more utilized as a pass first type offense. And that's not exactly true for Kevin McGiven. As I jumped into the numbers, and I'm going to bring in some of the top or the last 5 seasons for him. So Utah State at 2025, and then the other 4 seasons are going to be at San Jose State. I stopped at 2020 because that's always a weird year. Plus the last 4 years after that, you evolve as an offensive play caller. So, I'm just kind of sticking it to the last 5 years. With that said, to take a look at how he's utilized that, let me give you a reference point into who Utah was. This isn't really earth-shattering or breaking news type stuff. You know who Utah was. They were a ground and pound type team. They wanted to win the line of scrimmage. They wanted to rush the ball down your throat. We get that. For Utah, though, last year, 2025, in the number of attempts, this is just attempts. So yardages and all that stuff, production, all that stuff is different. Generally speaking, passing production is going to be better because it's easier to pick up 20 yards through a pass than it is to pick up 10 yards in the run. We all get that. We all understand that, right? But looking at just from the pure attempts perspective, Utah, in what they did last year, they were 61% geared towards the run. 61%. 39% towards pass. That's pretty obvious. They leaned in pretty heavily to the run game last year. You obviously had Devon Dampier, Bird Ficklin. You had Wayshawn Parker, Nakari Rogers, all those kinds of guys to be able to build to that. Other players factored into that, but you get the point. Pretty high number, right? Yet 2023, I'm not doing 2024. We're not going to do 2024. Nothing about the 2024 season should ever be brought into this as anything. We all understand how that season went. It was injury laden. There was no real consistency. It's an aberration in a lot of what Utah's ever done throughout the history of this game. So, we're not going to jump into 2024 because there's no real statistical measure that really makes sense out of that based off of all the injuries and everything. No, I'm not running away from the truth of 2024. I get it, right? Like, it is what it is, but we're not going to get into that. 2023. So Bryson Barnes is pretty much leading the charge. You have some Nate Johnson in there and everything. Utah once again was actually increased in their split, 63% run, 37% pass. So even higher. Not quite the same production as 2025. We get that, right? That season was kind of a rough season as well. You thought Cam Rising was going to start. We're not going to relitigate that. All right, let's go back to 2022 when Cam Rising was involved. And obviously, this was the second year of the Rose Bowl run, right? This was a year where Utah, over Cam Rising's tenure, that was probably the most balanced Utah has been in quite some time. There was a nice balance there because they did have playmakers on the outside. They did have, great running backs. They had a quarterback who could sling the ball. They had all those things, and it just kind of gelled. Even then, there was still an emphasis in the run with Utah going at 56% and 44% passing. Cam Rising finished with 3,034 passing yards. Dalton Kincaid had 890 receiving yards, the leading receiver that year, and Tavion Thomas rushed for 687 yards. So even though Utah leaned in more into the run game, there was a lot more production behind Tavion Thomas and everybody else, and it was much more geared towards that. That's your reference point. Didn't really feel like you had to get all of that just simply because that's who Utah is, but just kind of the reference point of, hey, they were generally speaking over 60% most years under Kyle Whittingham just because he loved to run the ball, and that's where the emphasis was. Looking at Kevin McGiven, over the last 5 years, 2 of those years, he emphasized the run a little bit more. Now, the production from the offensive side of the ball was generally still skewed towards the passing in terms of the total yardage. But by and large, he had 2 years, 2025, so Utah State, and 2023, 53% of that was geared towards the run. He called more run plays. That's all it was. But it's pretty even, right? 53% to 47% is about close to 50-50 as you can get in this, right? Like there's never going to be a true 50-50. And anybody that says you want a full balanced isn't really understanding what's going on. But the point being made is for the most part, he was pretty balanced in actually 3 of the last 5 years. The other year was 2021, where it was skewed just the other way, 53% towards the pass and 47% to the run. So 3 of his 5 years, he's pretty balanced. He's using his personnel in whatever way makes sense, right? Now, those production numbers are a little bit different in terms of yardage. I'm not going to get into that. That's not the point that I'm trying to make here. 2 years stand out, though, where he does lean in more heavily to the pass. One is 2022, where he passes for 56% of the time. Had a better quarterback that he wanted to lean into, had some wide receivers that did really well. You can go read my article that I published on this yesterday to get a full breakdown of that. I'm not going to spend the whole time in this episode doing that, but go on to ksl.com where you can see that article. You can go to my Twitter account. I tweeted it out. That's probably the easiest way to. 2024 is kind of the aberration here because in 2024 at San Jose State, he throws the ball 63% of the time. That's the highest there is. So yes, there has been an emphasis in most of those years to throw the ball, but many of those years are pretty negligible. Even 56% isn't a ton. It is a little bit more, but it's not like he's out there in this air raid offense, right? Like it's not a Mike Leach type offense where he's just chucking up the ball 80% of the time. This is still a pretty balanced offense. Only 2024 is where he's really leaned into more of the pass. And in many of those years, he had 1,000-yard receivers. So, there's a lot of effectiveness, we'll say, in that, which has kind of led you to this from Devon Dampier, Mac G. he put this one on Instagram, which I'm just going to leave that there because you know what? It's great because it's an awesome representation of it. A lot of people love Mac G, Kevin McGiven, and the reason they love it is because there's versatility in his offenses. He talked about this on Monday where, he's not looking at it from a pure distribution of the ball, right? He's not trying to give equal time to the wide receivers as he is to the running backs. The whole point here is he's trying to get the ball to his personnel that are going to have the hot hand, so to speak, right? If the run game is doing well in that respective game and that's part of the game plan, why go away from that to an extent if it's working, right? You don't want to just continue to be a one-trick pony, but he's going to lean into that. But then on the other hand, he can do a lot with the passing game. Even within those, he can mix it up. You've got wide receivers that are going to be much more involved in every aspect of the game. You've got guys that are going to be able to dominate, at least on paper. We can see that they can dominate because they've had the experience. Braden Pagan nearly got to 1,000 receiving yards last year. You had Kyrie Scholes, who was like 800 receiving yards. You have a lot of other players out there that are going to start emerging from there, and that's going to help this team. You mix into that the running backs who are going to be used in the passing game. They're going to catch more balls. They're also going to be factored into the run game. You've got Wayshawn Parker, Steve Chavez Soto, Daniel Bray. You've got Matiake Helu. You've got LaMarcus Bell. There's a lot of depth in all these positions where it's not just, RB1 and then maybe an RB2. It's not just wide receiver one and then maybe you're just kind of scratching at the surface where Utah's been for the last years. There's been much more depth and ability to be able to raise that room, right? That's not even talking to the tight ends, and I'm going to get to that one just next. But you're talking about a lot of the versatility that this team is able to have on the offensive side of the ball. So the split ultimately doesn't matter. He's trying to get the balance to the playmakers, right? He mentioned, like, you obviously know that Utah wants to pass the ball more this year because of the proven playmakers that they have. Braden Pagan is a cheat code, right? He's going to do a lot of things for you that you haven't been able to do for a Utah receiver in a long time. But at the same time, you have a guy like Wayshawn Parker back there, or you have Daniel Bray, guys that can do different, unique things for this team that you can't ignore, right? He said specifically, you don't want to leave these games feeling like you didn't give the ball to your best players, right? You don't want to go home that night and feel like, man, I wish I would have done more to that. There's, it's never going to be perfect. You've only got a certain amount of snaps that can go to players, but he's trying to find ways to get the ball to his playmakers. And that may be different each day, but if you can get Braden Pagan involved every single day, if you can get Wayshawn Parker involved every single day, the split doesn't necessarily matter. The point being, Utah is going to emphasize much more versatility in what they're trying to do. It's not, hey, we're going to cram it down your throat with this ball. We're going to mix it up and do whatever. Devon Dampier talked earlier in the fall camp about depending on what the defense gives you, they can mix it up and do a lot more. You may remember that Texas Tech game last year, and granted, Devon Dampier was hurt, and so it was tough. But you may remember that Texas Tech could sell out on the run game because they knew that Utah didn't really have any receiving threats that were going to be worth containing, right? You're not double teaming a guy because he's not really going to make a big difference. And so Utah tried so many different things to be able to do it. They went much more into a screen heavy game, which just got blown up at the line of scrimmage, which, dates back to the early Kyle Whittingham days of the Pac-12, where Utah would try to run these bubble screens left and right and then suddenly get blown up behind the line of scrimmage. And now you're suddenly at 2nd and 15 or whatever may have you. That was the Texas Tech game. This year, assuming that everything is what we believe it to be, this year can be different, right? If the run game is hot and it's, the opposing team isn't able to contain it very well, all right, lean into the run game. And then if they start containing a little bit more, start passing the ball. If the passing game is being effective and they can't, stop that, continue that. Or mix it up, be versatile, do different things. That's where this offense can seemingly operate, where there's so much more versatility in this team that they are able to do what they need to. Once again, that all has to be backed up on the field, right? It's easy to say that right here, even a week before camp or before the season starts, and say, "Oh, Utah's going to be so much better." On paper, and then on the words that they say, I think there's a lot of optimism and excitement about it, but it has to back itself up on the field, and that's where we're going to see, right? It's not going to be perfect. I don't think Utah's suddenly going to go out there and be this perfect team, but I think the potential, and especially with the versatility, is going to make this offense so much more potent than what it has been in years past. And there's been some potent offense, right? Like, I don't want to sit here and squander Utah's offenses of the past. You got to the Rose Bowl 4 good offenses, right? This isn't something, you didn't go beat USC or Oregon or all these other teams with just a good defense. That helped. You needed those. And that's going to factor into this team a ton. But you do need a potent offense, and Morgan Scalley is going to lean in more to that with the help of Kevin McGiven. So that's kind of my little rampage on that. That was probably much longer than you wanted on that, but I still think it's important. This is the biggest question for this team, right? I think by and large, most people trust the defense to do its job. There's going to be questions about that run defense, right? We get that. Tackling, all that kind of stuff. There's people living nightmares of being able to watch Bear Bachmeier not be taken down in that BYU game because Utah couldn't tackle the ball. It's the Kansas game where guys could not tackle. Guys were out of position. They just ran wild. Like, those things are real concerns, right? And those things are going to be addressed. At least they have been addressed. And the question is, can they actually do it? That's going to be seen out on the field. So there are questions. Don't get me wrong, but I think the biggest question here is, what type of offense is Utah going to run? Are they going to emphasize the things that fans have wanted for so long? Is it going to work? That's what we're going to see. And I think if everything comes together the way that many hope it can, this can be a very potent offense, and Utah could be a very good team with it. So there is that. Let's transition now to where do I want to go? Let's go tight end versatility. Whoops, let's put that back up. Let's go back to here. Sorry. Tight end versatility. This is a really intriguing position to me because talking to Luke Wells, he understands that there's a lot of versatility in his room as well, in terms of he's got so many different types of players. This isn't just, okay, you have some guys that put their hand in the dirt, act as the traditional tight end who, act as a secondary blocker to that offensive line. Maybe they're a pass catcher, a Cole Fotheringham type where they can be utilized that way. And then there's also the guys like the Brant Keithy, the Dalton Kincaids, the guys that are not necessarily the true hand in the dirt tight ends, but they're out there as a bigger bodied receiver. You've got that. Well, he does have both of those. You've got guys that can mix it up. Let's say Noah Benny can put their hand in the dirt. Will Money, younger player, but you can put your hand in the dirt, act as a protection that way. You have guys like Hunter Andrews, who's so much more of a tight end, or much more of a hybrid player than just a tight end. He can be a running back. He can be a tight end. He can be a receiver. You can utilize him in a ton of ways. And so there's a lot of advantages to being able to have a guy like Hunter Andrews. And then you have your rhinos. You got Sione and Semi Taulanga, who are going to be in there. They're acting as fullbacks. They're acting as tight ends. They're acting as receivers. They're acting as everything you can do to be able to make that work. And so this one position group has so much versatility, and I'm really fascinated to see how it goes. And for that point, Luke Wells has a big task on his hands to be able to do a lot with that much versatility, right? There's so many different ways that he can take it, and he can focus, hey, we're going to focus on the rhinos because that's where I think we can be more effective. We're going to focus on, the guys like Hunter Andrews who are going to be much more the receiving. That's been a challenge, right? That's a challenge to be able to get that, but he feels like he has the coaching staff and the support to be able to address all the needs that they need. As part of that, he's asking all of these tight ends to be able to understand the positions of everybody, right? Hunter Andrews may not fit into the rhino role. He's not a 300-pound fullback, essentially, tight end that's coming in there, but he still needs to understand those roles because they may utilize some of those same components, right? A tight end like a Semi Taulanga may be flexed out as a wide receiver, and you've got to max that out. So, to me, there's a lot of excitement about this tight end group. I think coming into spring, there wasn't a lot of talk about the tight ends, right? It was just kind of like thrown together as an afterthought, and many people thought, oh, Kevin McGiven doesn't utilize his tight ends a ton, so there's not going to be a big emphasis on that, right? Like it was in the past with Utah with their 11 personnel, 12, 13 personnel, where you're just stacking that line with these guys. Some of that was needed out of necessity because they needed protection. Others were, that's where they were getting their most production. So we'll see how that factors this season, but I'm really intrigued to see this tight end group and how they formulate with this offense, right? You're going to get those rhinos out there quite a bit. You want them on the field because they're just a unique player that are very tough to bring down. You give that ball to Semi Taulanga. I just keep using his name because, one, it's fun to have the semi truck there, but you put him in there and it's tough to bring him down. You've got some corner or even a linebacker to an extent trying to bring down this 300-pound guy. It's not going to be easy. And so I'm really fascinated to see how that is. I'm on the campaign where Semi Taulanga needs 300 receiving yards this year. I actually told Morgan Scally that the other day, and he just kind of chuckled, and he said, if he's doing that, we're in a really good spot. So we'll see if that happens. I don't know that he's going to get 300 receiving yards, but a guy can wish, right? I want to see that happen. So really intrigued by the defensive or the tight end room. Really, I'm curious to see how much of an X factor that brings to this team. You've got your wide receivers that are obviously being talked about a ton. You've got Wayshawn Parker and the running backs that are going to be great. But what type of element does this tight end room bring? And I'm curious to see how that all comes together. Let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive tackle production. This is going to be one of the biggest questions on that side of the ball, simply because of what I mentioned earlier, the Kansas State game, the Kansas game, where running or rushing was just absolutely abysmal. There was no tackling. There wasn't assignment soundness. There wasn't anything to be able to stop that run. And it was just a full lane essentially for these running backs to go through. There wasn't any learning or adapting from it. It was a real struggle. This is where this unit is going to be tested. And I'm really fascinated to see how they address that, right? I think, if you go into that Idaho game and suddenly Idaho is rushing all over Utah, there's going to be some cause for concern. Not to say that Idaho doesn't have players that can do it, but I think for all the offseason and the emphasis made for that, if this continues to be the case, that's going to be a real area of concern. With that said, Luther Ellis, feels very confident in what he has in that room. He's got guys that have high motors, guys that can shift over very quickly, that have done really well to kind of hone in on their assignments and what they're able to do. You have a guy like Jai Moy, who is a little bit more undersized traditionally than maybe what your prototypical defensive tackle will be. But Luther Ellis says he's like, honestly, some of the best defensive tackles in the game, at the NFL, are some of your more smaller guys that aren't the prototypical size that everybody wants to see for a defensive tackle. It's a matter of being assignment sound. It's a matter of being effective. It's a matter of doing all those things that you need to do to get the job done. And he feels very confident in these guys, what they're able to do. This position group is the biggest question mark that I have for the defense. But with that said, I don't necessarily worry about it based off of the guys that they have. I think it's more just making sure that they all can, live up to those expectations and what they're able to do. Outside of that, the secondary is pretty incredible. There's a lot of belief in this secondary, from the corners to the nickels to the safeties, in what they're able to do. You have a guy like Sharif Shah who doesn't like to speak glowingly of his players in terms of, oh, they're so ready. They're ready to go. I'm amped for the season. No, he's always got high expectations for these players. And even if they're performing at a high level, he still wants to see more. With that said, I feel like this year you've heard more praise out of Shah in a the way that he does than I ever have. I think they feel confident about the depth that they have. They feel confident about the players that they have and what they're able to do, the experience, the physicality, and also, once again, back to that versatile word. There's so many guys that can mix it up and do different positions, right? You have a guy, let's say like Jackson Benny, who can play safety, and that's where he's going to play, but he can mix it up and go into, a nickel. There's guys that can move all around, and there's guys that can play in the box, they can play outside, they can play safety, they can play nickel. They can do so much stuff. And I'm really fascinated to see if Utah utilizes more corner blitzes this year. They've got guys that have the physicality to be able to do it. The question is, are they assignment sound in what they are able to do? To me, that seems really fascinating in what they're able to do. But there's a lot of love and praise for this secondary unit, and it may honestly be the strength of this team. Last year, if you remember, looking at the defense, and it wasn't hard because the run defense wasn't great, but Utah traditionally isn't like a high level pass defense team. They've had struggles. They've had good players. Don't get me wrong. You've had, Clark Phillips, you have Jalen Johnson, you have other players out there who have done really well over the years, but it's never been a highly graded position group. And yet last year, Utah did really well in its pass defense and was graded, if I'm not mistaken, top 30, top 40, something like that, which is a huge improvement for where they have been at times. So I think a lot of that is going to carry over this year, assuming that guys stay healthy, assuming that they live up to those expectations. That's going to be a really intriguing couple of groups, because you've got corners, nickels, safeties, all kind of in that same area that are going to add to that. Continuing on, sorry, we're going through a bunch of this quickly, but I want to get to a bunch of these other things. Continuing with this, the Brandon Rose edition, just talking about him and what he affords this team. From my perspective, and this is me saying this, Brandon Rose adds a lot of ability for Utah to be able to do what they want with Devon Dampier and Bird Ficklin. Now, I say that with a caution, right? You're not just going to go throw those guys out there in a harmful situation just because you have a guy that you trust in, right? That has experience and all that. No, that's not the point that I'm trying to make. You still want to keep Devon Dampier healthy, right? You can see how much of a difference this team can be with Devon Dampier, especially when he's effectively doing his job. What I'm trying to say here is you're going to want to use Bird Ficklin in a lot of ways, right? He's not just going to be there to stand on the sidelines. And so there's going to be ways where Kevin McGiven utilizes him that are going to be different, that every time you're on the field, you're at risk of getting injured. But what I'm trying to say is there's potential where you can use both quarterbacks on that field and be able to have kind of that insurance, so to speak, that you're not killing your depth at quarterback. Now, knock on wood for Utah or whatever you want to do. Like, you don't want either one of these quarterbacks hurt, right? But at the same time, you don't have to necessarily worry. And I use that in a very, hedging my bet type way, like not worry, because that's not what any offensive coordinator wants. But you do have some insurance there with Brandon Rose to be able to help with some of that, right? Utah's gone through 5 quarterbacks before, so it's happened. But at the same time, you're much more set than what you were before Brandon Rose joined the team, because you were then stuck with 2 freshmen. And I don't want to say stuck in a pejorative way, but it's like you're turning over a team that is this well-oiled machine in theory to being 2 guys that are just barely joining the team and not really acclimated to D1 level yet. So I think that's it where it is with Brandon Rose. I think there was conversations about that and what they do. No coach is going to say, yeah, we can run Bird to the ground because we have Brandon Rose back there. No, they want to keep, Bird Ficklin back there. They want him in the game. Like, you're not going to be crazy and run, I can't even think of the word. It's right there. I can't think of it, but you're not going to be, exposing yourself to that just because you have another quarterback. But at the same time, I think it does help, and it adds a little bit to that depth that Utah's looking for. Lastly, with the points made from this week, and there's other points that we could get into, but last thing that I want to touch on is just the enhanced alumni presence at Utah. Morgan Scalley is a people person at the end of the day, and he understands that there's different things that you need to do to be able to get people to buy in. As a Utah man, he wants to be able to have others who have, played for the university, whether it was 2 years ago or 15 years ago, to be able to feel like they still have a connection with the program. Part of that means inviting them into practices more, giving them an insider look at what they're trying to do. They're former, players at Utah. They should be trusted to be able to, to handle anything that way. And it's also to give them kind of that sign of respect of, you've put in the blood, sweat, and tears here at this university. You should get something in return. And there's a big emphasis on being able to invite the alumni back, have them around the program, teach people about what a Utah man is, that kind of stuff. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to my colleague's podcast, Steve Bartle at the Utah Blockcast, where he interviewed Bo Nagahe, who talks about the alumni relations and what they're doing there and what Morgan Scalley wants. Honestly, a great conversation with Bo Nagahe and like what they're trying to do. So go listen to his podcast on that if you haven't. It's a great conversation about what they're trying to do. At the end of the day, I think Morgan Scalley wants to bring more Utah men into the program to let them be a part of it, right? He wants them on the field during the games. He wants that excitement, right? You see a lot of that around the country. You saw Miami last year with Michael Irving sitting there on the sidelines. Obviously, he's one of the more high-profile former players, but it's that kind of stuff where the camera's panning to this former player who's played in the NFL or played significant minutes. It would mean a ton if somebody like a Cam Rising was on the field cheering on Utah, supporting this team. Those types of players mean a lot to the program, and it builds that connection that Morgan is trying to do with this team. So really fascinated about that. I think it's a really cool opportunity and something that we didn't always see under Kyle Whittingham. It's not that I think he hated that. It was just more he cared about the football, right? He wanted to be the football coach. All the other stuff was periphery, and he didn't really care about that kind of stuff. Whereas Morgan wants to build these connections. He wants to come back and connect with other people, whether he knew them or not, whether they played in the 1960s or whether they played in 2024, right? Like, he wants to be able to build that connection and that team culture. Culture is his big word, right? It's not just this team. It's not just building it inside the football facility right now. It's extending that to all of that. It's the culture outside of that as the Utah man, right? And that's what he's trying to do. So really, Really fascinated to see how that goes, how much more maybe we see alumni on the field. There's always been alumni, right? Like Garrett Bowles, you see him a lot. Zach Moss is there, and he's now on the radio team for the broadcast team for Utah. You know, Sly Sylvester, who's always there. There's so many players that are always there and that hang around, but it's further cementing that to Utah, right? And that's what Morgan's trying to do. All right, let's jump into a little bit more news that's taken place around Utah. These are simple things. We're going to jump into the captains that were highlighted this last or picked this last week. As you're seeing on the screen right here, if you're watching on video, Devon Dampier, obviously named as a captain. Wayshawn Parker, Alex Harrison, those are your three offensive players. No real qualms with that, right? It makes a ton of sense to be able to have your starting quarterback, your starting running back, and then your center, you know, the heartbeat of that offensive line, a guy who has put in a ton of work to be able to stay with this program. It would be real easy for Alex Harrison to move on, right? He was been in the program for 4 years and he didn't get a starting role until this last year. So a guy that's bought into the program, done really well, and now you're hoping that he can have success on that offensive line. On the defensive side of the ball, you have your two linebackers, Jonathan Hall and Trey Reynolds, two guys that there's a lot of optimism about. Obviously, we've talked about Jonathan Hall and the steps that he needs to do to improve to get to where he needs to be, but there's a belief in him as one of the best players on that defensive side of the ball. Trey Reynolds, an up-and-coming guy that they feel really happy about, a guy that puts in the work every single day, who's going to come in there and work really hard for this team. You need that guy as one of your captains. And then lastly, Nate Ritchie, who has had an up and down career at Utah, and for, you know, better or worse for him, he's had to deal with a ton of injuries. Obviously, he comes onto the scene in 2020 where he just exploded and it looked like he was going to have this phenomenal career. And injuries have been rough on him, right? I think, you know, he's a guy that can be such a huge asset for this team because once again, he's a guy that could have just left. He could have said, you know what? I'm not getting the spotlight that I want. There's other guys that keep passing me by, or I'm not able to kind of be in the premier position that I've wanted. And yet he's continued to stick with it. These are culture builders for this team. And that's why they were picked as captains. And, you know, it backs itself up on the field a ton and what they're able to do. Moving on to that, this is the leadership council. If you're watching on video, I'm not going to name all the names, but there's a great group of guys there. One that's really intriguing to me is Tobias Merriweather. If you've followed his journey, last year he came in as this hyped recruit who was going to change the wide receiver game for Utah simply based off of measurables. He didn't have quite the production wherever he went, and it was always like waiting for him to be unlocking that potential. He's stuck through it. Last year was a rough year for him, quite honestly. And he's stuck through it. He's continuing to work. He's continually trying to find that connection with Devon Dampier and improve his game. Will it be seen this year? We'll see. You know, I'm really fascinated to see it. But a guy like that who could easily turn away and say, you know what, I took a lot of the blame. I wasn't good enough or whatever, and just kind of turn on himself and say, it's not worth it. I'm just going to ride out my college career and be done. Instead, he's fully embraced it and come into this, and he's now on the leadership council. These are voted on by the fellow teammates who are in there, and they see the work that he's putting in there. That means something, right? Regardless of the ups and downs and all that goes on, that means something for the players, right? To be able to see a guy like that who could easily throw in the towel and come in there and put it to work, right? With no guarantee that he's going to be wide receiver one, right? I'm assuming Braden Pagan's probably going to steal that light. He's going to be the guy that is going to be the featured wide receiver in that offense. But you have a guy like Tobias who, even when the production hasn't always been the best for him, he's coming in there and doing what he needs to be able to be effective for his team. And that means more. All right, let's transition now to some stadium experience changes. The biggest news, obviously, is the moment of loudness. This has been the conversation ever since Kyle Whittingham moved on, is what does Utah do at the moment of loudness? Do they keep it? Do they, you know, just let it kind of sunset and say, okay, it was a great thing under Kyle Whittingham, but especially as a lot of these players, you know, move on, there's not a lot of connections to Ty Jordan and Aaron Lowe anymore. Does this continue? Well, the biggest news that took place yesterday is the moment of loudness will continue, but it will not have the voiceover from Kyle Whittingham. That would feel a little weird, but it will have different experiences from people that played with Ty Jordan and Aaron Lowe. They will be the ones voicing it, adding elements to it that allow this tradition to continue, right? Obviously, this is also morphed into a lot of former Utah fans who have passed on. This is a tribute to all the people who have supported Utah over the years who have passed on. It's not just about Ty and Aaron. Obviously, they are the figureheads of this and a good reason for this tradition to come out. But this is kind of now the next iteration of this, in the Morgan Scally era. And I think this is a great and appropriate response to this, right? So many teams are trying to find different traditions, right? And each tradition is great in their own right. And for a long time, Utah was kind of mixing and matching with different things to be able to find their own tradition. And they had some, right? You had the dancing crazy lady or whatever you wanted to call her. There was other things that took place, but this one, born out of tragedy, unfortunate tragedy, this one became a tradition that has really bonded and blended the teams and the fans together, right? The whole family culture that Utah's tried to build on for years was epitomized in this, right? It's epitomized in in the sense of all of these people have put their blood, sweat, and tears into Utah football. And so why not honor all of them? And it's a great sign to be able to have those, your flashlights come up in the between the third and fourth quarter. You have a tribute to all the people that have passed on or the people that have meant a lot to Utah football. It's a great opportunity to continue that moment of loudness. And for me, every single year, you see this a ton. I'm at every single game. You see it a ton. I've written stories about it when it all happened. Like I've been in the thick of this moment of loudness stuff, tradition. And every single year, the moment of loudness is still such a special thing, right? As an objective person outside of this university, it is such a fun tradition that means so much to a lot of people, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it again next Thursday to see the new iteration of it and how Utah does it. I think this is going to be a really cool opportunity, and you add to that now with these LED lights that Utah has installed. You add to it with the environment that they're trying to create with those LED lights. Simple, it's a simple thing, but it's something to kind of add some unique entertainment value. At the end of the day, whether Utah wins or losses, this is an entertainment product, right? Obviously, it matters more to a lot of these players and the fans, and people live and die by all this. But at the same time, this is entertainment. And if you're not feeling entertained at the stadium, you're not going to come back. And little things like this, changing the lights, changing the presentations of things, trying to make things better for the user experience, that all matters in the entertainment world. And Utah's trying to step up their game there. They're a little behind, right? We get that. So many stadiums out there have that LED light experience. But I think that mixed with some of these other elements that they're trying to do changes that for Utah. Really fascinating to see how that goes. And then lastly, as part of this is the shift to the cauldron lighting that always came, the Olympic cauldron lighting that came in between the first and second quarters. That is now going to be lit 42 minutes before game time with the cannon, the Red Thunder cannon going off. This is a signal to Utah fans to make their ways down from the tailgate lot, to be able to come down, get into the stadium, be ready. And it just, it's a fun little signifier that the game is ready, right? And it allows Utah to be able to kind of still carry on that tradition of the Olympics. It's a unique experience, right? Not many stadiums out there get to just light an Olympic cauldron out there. USC, I can think of as an example, but there's some power to that. And I think it's just harnessing it in the right way. Not saying this is the right or wrong way, but I think it's a good opportunity for Utah to still have it lit while still, trying to do something related to that with the game experience. All right, that's your stadium experiences. We're gonna go into now to the hot takes. I had some other stuff in here. I don't have time to get into all that. We've run long with all this. But before I jump into that, I just want to give you a plug for our KSL Sports Pick'em. You can go in there and pick 5 different games each week. It'll be the BYU game, Utah State game, and then 2 national picks. All you got to do is put your score in there, what you think will be the final score. If your team wins, so if Utah wins that week and you have them winning, whoever has the closest score will get the most points, and then it's just kind of filtered from there. If you have them winning and they lose, you don't get any points for that week. But it's fun to be able to compete with your friends, your family. It's your traditional pick 'em. There's money on the line. You get $100 gift card if you're the top person at the end of the week out of all of the KSL Sports users. It's a lot of fun to be able to just kind of take an enhanced level play of college sports. So jump in there, go sign up on KSL.com. It's a great opportunity to be able to compete while also still trying to earn some money. It's a cool opportunity, and I look forward to that. We'll put out our staff picks and kind of show you what we're doing each week, but we'll see what happens. All right, let's jump into the season hot takes. And like I said, some of these I can see happening. Some of them are a stretch. Some of them I don't really feel that confident about, but I need to put some hot takes out there, right? So here's where we're going to go. And we're going to start off with a hot take. They're all hot takes, but a hot take. I'm going to say that Utah starts the season 8-0 with everything to play for against BYU at home. 8-0. Now, in Morgan Scalley's first year, look, I don't want to, hype everything up and say, oh, everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows, because there's going to be some struggles along the way, right? As much as we've talked about this schedule being a challenge, or not as much of a challenge, it's still got challenging games, right? You've still got opponents on the schedule that are going to make this very difficult for Utah. And getting to 8-0 is far from a guarantee, right? I get that your belief in Utah makes you feel like they should be able to be 8-0. But that's not a guarantee, and it's a challenge. So with that said, you do have Idaho. I think you can circle in Idaho. You should probably be able to circle in Utah State because you're playing them at home, and outside of Bronco Mendenhall just giving them fits because he knows Kevin McGiven's playbook, that's different, but I think you can kind of pencil in those games. You can probably pencil in Kansas, but I'm not entirely sure. It's a home game. Utah should have the upper hand, but, we'll see, right? So right there's at least 3. Arkansas comes to Utah in week 2. Now, Arkansas is picked as the worst SEC team from this year. With that said, they still have pieces. There were several games last year that they lost by just a 1-possession game. This is not a bad team. And I don't want to say, oh, it's just because they're an SEC team. No, they do have pieces. I just think they're not yet to that level where they're competing. SEC is obviously hard. There's a lot of great teams there. But I think this isn't necessarily the year for Arkansas. With that said, this could absolutely be a game that Utah loses. This is going to be the game where I feel like we're going to understand a ton about Utah. The benefit there is it comes in week 2, which you usually see the biggest improvements from week 1 to week 2. So there is potential there. This can also be a very dangerous spot where if there's some struggles in that Idaho game and Utah can't get it figured out, suddenly you snowball and now you're looking at a 1-1 start to the season, especially against an SEC team that isn't expected to do really well. And maybe they shock people, right? You never know. But, it's not going to be an easy situation for Utah. It is non-conference play, so it ultimately doesn't matter. It's more it takes a hit in your national rankings, but you can build those back up. The toughest games here, one, you've got Iowa State. Iowa State's not expected to be great this year. It's a full rebuild over there, but this is your first road game of the season. So not an easy situation. Once again, if Utah's not in a great spot, or they're not fully connected yet, if that Utah State game the week prior is just kind of out of sync, this Iowa State game could spell trouble. It's your first road game. So we'll see. I still think that's probably in a penciled win, but who knows? So at that point, you're maybe 4-0, maybe you're 3-1. We'll see. You got Kansas at home. Then you go on the road to Colorado. And I know, there's some that believe that Colorado could be improved this year. I'm not quite ready to believe it. I still think Colorado is going to be one of the worst teams in the Big 12. You're on the road, yes. But 6 weeks into the season, you should have a good understanding of who this team is, who Colorado is. There's not going to be anything that necessarily surprises you, and that's a winnable game. The biggest test on this schedule, in my opinion, is going to be Houston. Now, Houston got some good breaks last year with their schedule, and it wasn't always great for them despite them finishing with a good record. I'm really fascinated to see Houston. They're in my top 25 as a team that I think can do well. With that said, they're also the team that I said that could fall back, right? And I think, I'm really curious to see how this Houston team goes because it's not going to be an easy test for Utah. But at the same time, I don't know that Houston is exactly put together the way that everybody wants them to be. And so we'll see. Then lastly, you have that road game against Cincinnati, which will present a challenge. We don't really know what Cincinnati will provide. Yes, Utah blew out Cincinnati last year, but that's not a guarantee this year. So can Utah get to 8-0? Sure. I think there's a reasonable expectation that they can get to 8-0, but I think you can also get into that situation at 6-2. And I think that's still a good situation for Utah and Morgan Scalley's first season. It could be worse, right? You could be 3-3 or 3-3. That's not 8. Come on, you idiot. 5-3. You could be any one of those. I don't think 5-3 is on the table there. It could happen. we'll see. It's hard to predict these things in, August when games haven't been played. But I think there is a real shot that Utah can go 8-0 with a real potential to bring in BYU and have that be kind of the quote unquote decider for one of the spots in the Big 12 championship game. Will it happen? Probably not. We'll see. I think, it's easy to say 8-0 when you look at that schedule, but I think once the games start kicking off, it's harder to be able to say that. So really fascinated, really curious to see what that schedule breaks for Utah. At the very end of the day, it does ramp up really well for Utah, where if they do have some problems and they're not fully connected in what they want to do, the schedule affords itself a little bit of leeway where they can kind of build into it before you get into that Houston game. And then suddenly you're playing BYU and Arizona, where it's going to be a little bit tougher. That back half of the schedule is definitely tougher. But we'll see. The schedules, they're played out on paper right now, and nobody wins the championship on paper. So we'll see. Next hot take. Devon Dampier throws for 3,000 yards this season. Now, you may be like, that doesn't sound like that much, right? 3,000 yards. He could do that, right? Prize Picks, I just pulled this one because I had the app and I pulled it up. I was just more curious what they had. They have him as the over-under at 2,400. Well, let's say the real number here, 2,474.5 yards. So let's just round it up to 2,500 yards. That's kind of their over-under on Devon Dampier. Looking at what he did last year, he threw for 2,490. So he's already over that over-under line from Prize Picks, which is going to be pretty similar to a lot of these, odds numbers. So he throws for 2,500 yards essentially last year. He was injured. They didn't emphasize the passing game a ton, and he does that. At New Mexico, he threw for almost 2,800 yards. He had 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Was a little bit more turnover prone, but they did emphasize the pass a little bit more there, even though they had him rushing a ton at New Mexico. He was kind of the do-it-all player at New Mexico. My point here is that I think Utah is going to try very hard to be able to emphasize the pass a little bit more this year. Even all the things that I said, they're going to be, versatile and try to mix it up. I still think there's going to be a huge emphasis on trying to get the pass. And with a guy like Braden Pagan, Kyrie Scholes, Larry Simmons, Creed Whittemore, Ricky Johnson, all these guys, I think there is potential where he can get to 3,000 yards, barring injury or something that way. But I'm going to say he gets over 3,000 yards. Now, with that being said, Utah is not a factory of 3,000-yard quarterbacks. Let me tell you what that is. Over the last 40 years, only 4 players have thrown for over 3,000 yards. 4. Yes, 40 years. That's 1 every 10 years, essentially. Not great, right? Your players are, in 2022, Cam Rising, 3,034 yards. Rose Bowl year, great year, right? 3,000 yards, just barely. Tyler Huntley, 2019, also a great year for Utah. Was potentially a playoff team until the end when injuries and then that Pac-12 bowl game or Pac-12 championship game absolutely went sideways, just completely obliterated them. Tyler Huntley throws for 3,092 yards. After that, you're going all the way back to 1994 and 1993, both from Mike McCoy. 3,000 yards one year and then 3,800 yards the other year. And then back-to-back years with Scott Mitchell in 1989 and 1988. Obviously, the record holder in 1988 at 4,300 yards. So 4 players in the last 40 years have done that. We'll see. That's a stretch, right? I think that's a good goal for Devon Dampier. I think 3,000 is a great goal. But at the same time, will it get done? I don't know. We'll see. I think with what Utah has on the outside and what they're able to do, it can very well be achieved, but he still has to take it at a next level, right? And we have to see him as a better passer and what he's able to do. This very well may be a low number, right? He could have a very high year and he throws for 3,500 yards. If that's the case, if he's doing that and rushing for, 500 yards, he very well could be in Heisman, conversations. I'm not going to put that as a hot take. I'm not going to say he's in the Heisman conversation as a hot take, okay? I'm not doing that. I'm just getting you to 3,000 yards. By the way, Brian Johnson and Alex Smith narrowly missed that. Brian Johnson in 2008 finished with 2,972. You can basically round him up to that if you want. And then Alex Smith in 2004, the year he was drafted, got to 2,952. So close. You almost had 6 players. You almost had 6. But, the point being, it's not an easy mark, especially at Utah, though I think there's going to be a shift in that focus. All right, that leads me to my next hot take. My next hot take is that a receiver this year will finally break the 1,000-yard barrier. Utah has been trying so hard to be able to cross that. And it's been 13 years since Utah got a receiver to cross that barrier. Drez Anderson finished with 1,002 yards. Barely got that. 1,002 yards, Drez Anderson. Darren Carrington almost had that back in 2017. He had 980. Fans were really excited. Dalton Kincaid had his in 890 in 2022. But that's essentially it since then. It hasn't been an easy situation for Utah receivers, all for the reasons that we mentioned previously in this podcast. Outside of that, before that, it was 2009 with David Reed at 1,188 yards. Excuse me. Not an easy situation for a Utah receiver. You come to Utah to be a blocker. That's what a lot of people have said, right? And as much as that hasn't always been the case, it's still been kind of the case around Utah. So really looking forward to that. To my guess is that Braden Pagan is that guy. If anybody can, he's probably that guy. Really fascinated to see if it is him or somebody else. But I think Utah has the potential to be able to get a 1,000-yard receiver. If they do, I think that helps unlock Devon Dampier's ability to be able to get to 3,000 yards. That'll be further magnified by my next hot take, which is 2 other receivers will record over 500 yards. So in totality, you're at least 2,000 yards between 3 receivers. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot, right? One, you're asking for a 1,000-yard receiver. And then on top of that, you're asking for 2 500-yard receivers. Not easy. My candidates, Larry Simmons, Kyrie Scholes, Ricky Johnson, or Creed Whittemore. There could be others, right? There could be anybody that jumps in there and steals that show. To me, Larry Simmons and a Kyrie Scholes, maybe even Ricky Johnson are probably the best, but equipped for that. But, it could be Hunter Andrews as a tight end. It could be, any number of players. But I do think with this roster and based on how Utah's trying to run, 1,000 yards and 2 500-yard receivers is definitely on the table. Now, I say that as a definitely on the table being like, oh, he thinks this is going to be an easy thing. No, this is not an easy thing at all. I just went over the 1,000-yard receiver line. Like, it's not been easy for Utah. But with that said, I do think that Utah has that potential. For example, last year, Ryan Davis finished with 725, Dallin Bentley at 620, and J.J. Buchanan as a freshman just barely missed it at 427. So you need a little bit more production in the passing game, at least with those top 3, and you have that potential. I think it can happen. Next one is Wayshawn Parker eclipses 1,300 all-purpose yards. Keep that in mind, all-purpose yards. Last season, he finished with 1,166. You've heard a ton about his rushing record, where he was 19 yards shy of 1,000 rushing yards. I'm not going to put a number necessarily to his rushing yards because I think he's going to be utilized in a different way. Do I think he gets to 1,000? Potentially, right? I think he wants really hard to get there. I think he's worked very hard to do it, that they're going to try to feature him in more than they did last year. So there is true potential for him to get to 1,000. With that said, I think they're also going to utilize him more as a receiver. And so some of those yards are going to go into that area. So 1,300 yards, it's only about 134 yards more than last year, and he can be featured more this year. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, now I've got 3 receivers who are accounting for 2,000 yards. I've got Wayshawn eclipsing 1,300 yards. I mean, that's a lot of production from this Utah team, right? Just from 4 players alone. We'll see. That's a really tall task for all of this to happen. If all of this happens, Utah's in a very good spot, right? I think Utah's absolutely contending for a Big 12 title. They're likely a playoff team. If all those things happen, this is a very good season for Utah. All or none of those could not happen, right? All or none of those could not happen. Interesting phraseology there. All of those could not happen. Some of them could happen. We'll see. I don't know. Sometimes, you wonder what you say. It happens. All right, we're moving on from that. I got 2 more to go. We're not going to do any on the defensive side of the ball. I didn't want to spend any on the defense. Sorry, defense, you don't get any this year. But I'm going to go with 1 more on the offensive side of the ball. And I kept this one kind of low for what I would hope that Utah could do with it. But I also understand it's not easy. I'm going to go with Semi Taulonga, finishes with 50 receiving yards or 50 rushing yards. I'm not going to put a point on it. And I'm not going to call this all purpose. I'm going to say 50 either or. Either rushing or either receiving. That doesn't sound like a lot, but for a big guy like that to be able to get 50 yards, that's a lot. Okay? So I'm looking forward to it. I'd love to put that at 100. If we could get Semi Longa to 100 receiving yards at the end of this season, or even rushing yards, like, that's awesome. That's phenomenal to be able to see. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. My last hot take, and it's going to go to the special team side, is Dylan Curtis. And I had one last year on this. He had a rough up and down year, but I think he's made some strides and doing well. Dylan Curtis attempts and makes a 55-yard plus field goal. Last year I said 60, just because we were hearing some good things. I think he can get to 60, but I'm going to hedge it a little bit. I'm going to take it down a tiny bit, and I'm going to say 55 yards. And I'm going to believe in that. I'm going to believe that Utah can get that done. Now, do you want him taking a 55-yard field goal? Probably not, right? Not because he can't make it, but because you want to be able to be in a better position. But at the same time, I think that's what it's going to be. So those are my hot takes. You can agree with them, disagree with them. Maybe they're lukewarm. Maybe they're scalding hot. I don't know. Those are the hot takes for the season. We'll revisit those at the end of the year. A lot of the hot takes that we made last year actually did come to fruition. Some were not so great. But, good on us for being able to do that. So looking forward to seeing how so wrong I was. Maybe good, maybe bad. But seeing how wrong I was in what we're able to see from this season. But at the end of the day, next week is football. Next Thursday night, you're going to be sitting in Rice-Eccles Stadium screaming at Idaho, screaming at Morgan Scalley for the bad play. No, I'm just kidding. Well, you will. You will. Utah fans love to scream because things are going wrong. Every fan does, right? We get it. There's nothing wrong with you. You're a fan. You want to see good entertainment. Morgan, hear that. Go get some good entertainment out there. No, I know. He knows that. All right. With that, we're going to sign off. Come back next week. We'll preview Idaho. Get ready for game day. And we'll get this season going. You've waited long enough. It's time to have it finally here. So with that, we're going to sign off. Hope you have a great day, and we will chat with you later.